In this video, I will show you how to do a application sequence. Now, before we actually begin the sequencing, there's some pointers I'd like to give. Now, as I mentioned, you should use a clean virtual machine. Now, it could be a vanilla image with nothing on it other than the sequencer, or if you'd like, you can have some of your company's applications on it. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you ensure that it's clean. So don't go virtualizing an application on it and then saving a snapshot. You should set up your sequencer and then right away take a snapshot. Don't forget to take a snapshot, because if you use the machine to do a sequence and then want to use it again, it may make for a bad sequence and dirty applications. Also, disable Windows updates and any other services which may interfere with the application sequencing process. So it's no good if a Windows update runs while you're actually doing your sequence, because it could capture some of those file updates that Windows updates are making into your actual virtual application, and you don't want that. Other services which you should probably disable include Windows Defender. There may also be some antivirus running on your machine, or other services that you're aware of that run in the background on your own company's image. I suggest to sequence on your target platform. So if your users are going to be using the AppKey client on Windows 7 64-bit, I would sequence your application on a 64-bit Windows 7 machine or virtual machine. Now, there may be cases where you want to sequence an application on XP, because perhaps there's an obsolete component on XP that you want to put into your virtual application, which is fine. You can do that, and it will still work, or should still work, on your newer platform. It's just, I think the most efficient way is to sequence against your target platform. Now, the Microsoft best practice during sequencing is to sequence to your Q drive, which, as you may remember, is your virtual drive. That is fine. However, some applications may actually require to be installed to the C drive. If you have the application on a Q drive, a D drive, any other drive, it just won't function properly. And in those cases, you can install to the C drive when you're doing your sequencing. However, you can sequence to the C drive, and I would suggest that, just because you don't have to worry about those issues, and sequencing to the Q drive appears to be a best practice for performance. However, from my experience over the last 5 years or so, performance does not get impacted significantly when applications are sequenced to the C drive. In fact, I've measured this before, and it was a case of milliseconds. Let's go ahead and sequence a sample application. So I've just picked a small little application called Orca, which is an MSI editor. It's an application that's part of the Microsoft toolkit, which allows you to open MSI installer files and browse through and make changes to the different tables. So I've got my source here, so it's ready for installation. So let's go ahead and actually sequence this. So I'm going to launch my application virtualization sequencer. Now on the first screen, you've got a couple options here. You can create a new virtual application package, or you can modify an existing virtual application package. So if you're making changes to an application you already virtualized, maybe you're updating it by putting in a couple new files that have been updated, you can use the modify option and just update it that way. In this case, we're going to go ahead and create a new virtual application. You can see also on the right side there's some helpful links. There's links to the white papers, and there's also these community links. The application virtualization forum is very helpful. This is the Microsoft TechNet forum. So if you ever run into any sequencing issues or any issues with your app environment, that's a great place for knowledge sharing. So you could probably get your answer right there. There's also package accelerators, which is a cool feature of 4.6 SP1. Basically, an accelerator is if you have a large application and you don't want to have to duplicate that work if there's a new version, or if you have to do this multiple times for different business units or what have you, you could do it once and save it as a package accelerator. That way, when you need to sequence again, all you do is open up and point to a package accelerator, click once, and it automatically sequences for you. A really cool thing about this is some of the more large, complex applications that required a lot of manual configuration have already been created as package accelerators and uploaded online to the Microsoft TechNet site. So if you go to TechNet, you can download accelerators for large applications such as Microsoft Project or Adobe Reader 10, two applications that are very widely used. And there's also the application virtualization blog, so it keeps you abreast of all the new changes. Before we go on and move on to actually do the sequence, let's have a look here at our options. So in options, you can see you have the option to apply a template when creating new packages. Now, you could create a template for your actual company or for the environment you're working in and ensure that certain options are by default checked, such as compressing your application, using your port 554 in our case, and so on. I'll go through those options after we go through the sequence because it will show in the actual user interface once we're finished. Something else that's important is this parse items. So the parse item list is the actual directories that the sequencer is going to actually search through for changes. So when you're actually doing your sequence, you're installing applications and your files, your registry to the machine, and then the AppV sequencer will be monitoring those directories and seeing any changes that are made to them, so it's captured into a virtual application. Now the exclusion items contain a list of directories that you don't want the AppV sequencer to actually monitor and capture the changes for. A good example of this would be the C Windows installer path, which is used for caching MSIs. So if you're using an MSI to install, usually it will cache to the actual Windows installer folder. You may want to eliminate this because it's not needed in a virtual environment. The MSI will never be used. You can see a lot of user directories here are also excluded by default, and cookies, history, internet cache, because you never really want them to be captured anyways. I'm going to leave it as a default here, just for the sake of speed, and to show you just why exactly you'd want to set these. So let's go ahead and create our new application package. Okay, you can see this is where our accelerator comes into play because it allows you to use a package accelerator rather than actually go through the sequencing wizard. Here I'm just going to create a package because that's what we want to do here. Now, on this screen, it's detected. It will do a quick diagnostics on your sequencing machine and preempt any possible issues. Here we can see that the Windows Defender is active, which could interfere, as I said, with the actual sequence because it will be running in the background when our sequencer is trying to capture changes. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to disable the service. So you can see Windows Defender service has started there. I'm just going to stop it. So that service is stopped now. If I hit refresh, we're all good to go. No more problems. Let's move on to next. On this screen, you've got an option for the different types of applications that you're sequencing. So on the bottom, you've got middleware, which would be things like Java runtime, Visual C++ redistributable. Where that would be important is when you're choosing to use dynamic suiting composition in your environment. You may have multiple applications which require the runtime. So in that case, select your middleware and go ahead and dynamically suite once it's sequenced. An add-in or plugin, that would include Office add-ins. Again, if you have virtualized Office 2010, you can actually dynamically suite your add-ins and plugins for Office. Pretty cool, huh? Standard application, which is the default, which would be any regular standalone application, which is what we're going to be doing in this case. So let's select that and move on. Now, select installer for the application as the default here. It will allow you to browse to the actual application you want to install. So let me browse to my installer here, which is my Orca MSI. There we go. And on the bottom you can see perform a custom installation. Now I'd usually actually use perform a custom installation because I'm somebody that likes to have a lot of control, I guess. When you do that option, if you have multiple applications to install, if you're suiting multiple applications, it's very easy because when you select that, the sequencer takes the first snapshot, allows you to do whatever you want, and then you choose when it captures the changes. So let's just demonstrate the default here. Okay, package name here. In this case, I'm going to use Orca MSI editor, and this is 3.1, which is a pretty old version, but hey, if you want to support multiple versions of applications, this is the perfect solution. So maybe I have a 3.1 virtualized and I virtualize 5.0, and both can be used. Pretty cool. And I'm going to put in x86 as well, because in environments where you have both x86 and x64 supported, it can be useful to track that, right? Now, our primary virtual application directory is our queue, which is okay for us. That is the actual best practice. In previous versions of AppV Sequencer, you could use what was called an 8.3 folder rather than this Orca MSI editor. You can modify this to whatever you want it to be as well. So I could just maybe get rid of some of this and put in Orca 3.1, whatever suits you. Now, what should happen here is it should load up and hopefully launch my installer. Now you can see it automatically launched the installer for Orca. And you can see down the bottom corner, it says install the application to the specified location, which is our Q Orca 3.1. So I'll go through the installation and go to accept. I'll go to custom. And what I'll do here is I'll change this location to our Q Orca 3.1. You can see if you wanted, you could remove certain features if you don't want them. I'll just leave everything as default. And I will install. Okay, that's completed. Now, if I wanted to include extra files or another installer here, I could simply click Run. In this instance, I don't want to do that. You could, if you wanted, launch your application here during the sequence as well, just to see if there's any uh, splash screens or any registration prompts. That way you can open up and close out of those or disable those so users don't get that. There's also an option after we finish to manage those first use tasks that I just mentioned. So you can see it's collecting the system changes. So as I had said earlier, it's going to monitor those folders that were in the parse items list to see what changes are there, as well as monitor the registry. And it's completed. So as I said here, it's allowing you to run each program to manage the first use task. So let's have a look. Go and select it. You can see there's no splash screens. There doesn't appear to be any option to update the application, which is important, by the way. You should disable the ability to update or automatically update applications that are virtualized, because it's kind of pointless having it. If the update tries to go to the local machine, the application isn't installed to your local machine, so the update doesn't get applied properly. As well, if it actually does have the sense to update into the virtual environment, then it's not managed. So if for some reason you remove that application and clear the cache off the user machine and then send it back down, it's not the up-to-date version, so it's just going to want to update again. It's kind of pointless. So I'll just close out of that and hit next. Okay, so we can see here it's done an installation report, and if I click on this, it says files excluded from the package, and it's telling me that a file that was put down to see program data, which looks like a system index file, was excluded. That's because it was in the exclusion list that I showed earlier. That's fine. It says it's like gather logs, so it's a good shout that it's probably not required by the application. Now the installation report is very useful because if your application doesn't work, you can come back and look at these excluded files and say, hey, my application actually requires this. So you could set up the sequence again, maybe resequence, and just take that folder directory out of the exclusion list. Okay, let's hit next. Now you can stop now, which will create a virtual application package using the default settings. If you configured using a template, your default will be whatever you set up in the template. Otherwise, it's going to assume it's RTSPS and 322, which we don't want in this case. So I'm going to select Customize. By selecting Customize, it allows me to configure everything basically I want. So what I like to do here is right-click on my shortcut and go to Edit. You can see it's pointing to Q. That's fine. What I'll actually do is I will apply a naming convention to this. Okay, and I'm going to put in x86 as well. Why not? Okay, and my icon looks correct. So I will save that. Now you can also see that there's file type associations. I'm able to expand it so it suggests it captures some for this. Okay, so we can see Orca is able to open PCP, MSM, and MSI files. It may be a case that, say you have an application that has file type associations, but you don't want those file type associations to apply to your application. For example, if you don't want .txt to open in a virtualized text editor, you want it to open in your local notepad. You don't want to capture txt as a file type association. So it's good to plan that out beforehand what do you want to apply to your virtual applications and what don't you. All right, and we can see shortcuts as well. So it looks like the shortcut here is going to go to Start Menu Programs. We'll leave that as our default. That doesn't really bother me. That sounds good. So next screen is to run each program briefly to optimize the package. What this does when you're using streaming is it allows you to launch an application and maybe like go to some menus and browse around the application, and then it will capture what you've done, the activity you've done, what menus you enabled and what menus you opened, etc. and capture that. And that's going to be called your feature block 1. Feature block 1 can be anything up to 40% of the application. So that 40% will be cached automatically for the user. So it'll seem as though it's very snappy, it's very quick. The application launch is very quick. In some cases, if you've done that with your applications, users will actually notice a performance increase. Applications will launch quicker. Now, the entire application hasn't actually been presented to the user, but it'll be unbeknownst to them, because the rest of the application, the other 60% say or more, will actually be streaming down to the user's machine block by block in the background. So let's launch our application. You can see Orca is opened up here. Let's go to File, Tables, Edit, Transform Tools. So basically just navigate around, and then I will exit. And there you go. It's captured what I just did, and it's put it into our feature block 1. So the application should launch, and those menus should be available on launch. Now, here you can restrict your application to only work on certain operating systems if you'd like. In the MSI world, this would be called a launch condition. It's pretty similar. If you have an application that you know is not going to work on, say, 64-bit Windows 7, you can select just Windows 7 32-bit. If you have an application that will only work on XP, uncheck your Windows 7 and check Windows XP. You can also select to allow it to run on any operating system. So, for convenience sake, I'm just going to select that option here. You can see also the different platforms which you can sequence for, including 64-bit, Windows Server 2008 Terminal Server R2, Windows 2008 Terminal Server 64-bit, not R2, Windows 2003 Terminal Server 64-bit, XP, Vista, and Windows 7 64-bit also, and also the 32-bit of 2003 Terminal Server and 2008 Terminal Server, as well as 32-bit of XP, Vista, and Windows 7. Now here you have the option to compress your package and save the package now, and basically that be that. I'm going to continue modifying the package because I know we've got customizations to make because we're not using a template. Here you can see you've successfully sequenced your application, and again it's just prompting about that file exclusion from earlier. So here we're presented with our user interface for the sequencer of our sequence application. We can see our package name that we said earlier. It also gives you a comments box. So you may want to track certain properties or attributes of your sequence. So let's say, for example, sequence by. I'll set that as my own name, Rory Monahan. And maybe we'll set something like sequencer ver for the sequencer version used. Let's say 4.6 SP1. And maybe you want to set the date modified. Something like that. You'll have a better idea of what's relevant to you. or to your project. An interesting aspect of that, you can see I've been putting in semicolons after each, because AppV outputs OSD files, which essentially are XML files. You could, if you'd like, import them into an SQL database, and then you could be able to query these properties. So you could query, say, all the applications that have been sequenced by Rory Monaghan, for example. Okay, let's move to the deployment tab, which is the most important. So you can see, as I said, the default here is RTSP and 322, which we saw before. I'm going to change that to RTSP 554. You can also see the host name set to our socket server, which is exactly what we want. Because, again, if we have to change the host name, it's not hard-coded, and we just change the environment variable set on the client machines. Now, path is going to be the path on the content share. If you can remember the content share, which is set up on the server, it's the path where our application, our virtual application, is going to live. So I'm just going to say, we'll put this on Orca MSI editor 3.1 and x86. Why not? Okay, our operating system, again, we'd already set this, so it's set to any operating system. All looks good to me. Output options. Now, the default here is that enforce security descriptors is checked. You can select to have that enabled to enforce security descriptors, and what that will do is, if there's any permissions, NTFS permissions, set on your application's folders or folders and files, registry permissions do not apply to the virtual registry, but you can enforce folder and file permissions in your AppV environment. Now, to me, I wouldn't use that, just because I think one of the cool benefits of AppV is that you're less concerned with users being able to access the different files and folders, because it's not being installed to your C program files or to your root of C or anything like that. It's going to the virtual environment. What's the harm with users being able to reach something that's in a virtual environment and can't hurt your machine? None, exactly. So I'll uncheck it. Generate Microsoft Windows Installer MSI package is automatically checked. The MSI package can be used in a standalone model. I leave this checked because I like to have the option if, say, for argument's sake, later on down the line, I want to set up without the servers for some reason, I don't know, but it's good to have the option. Why not create that? And compress package, that's unchecked. I like to check that just because your output, even when it's just one application that's been virtualized into a virtual application, your virtual application tends to be larger than a regular Windows application. It can be up to 3 times larger than the Windows application equivalent. So by compressing the package, you're cutting down the actual size of the application. The compression algorithm used is zlib, and it's compressed into 64 KB bytes. Change history at the moment will be blank because we haven't saved it yet. Files gives you a tree view of the files that have been captured. Virtual registry, you can see it's not like your actual local registry, right? It doesn't have HKey current user, HKey user, HKey classes root, HKey local machine. Instead, it just breaks the registry down to machine and user, which is essentially what registry is anyways. It falls under one of those two. So what I like to do here is, I like to do a search on the registry for, say, my machine name and for my username. If you see any hard-coded values for those, you should obviously investigate and remove that, because you don't want users getting hard-coded values for you. You can also see that it's variabilized the SFT SID, which is cool. That's what ideally what you want is everything to be variabilized so it works for all the users. The virtual file system. Now, I intentionally did not include the Windows installer to the exclusion list items like I said I could. It's to show you that without setting some certain exclusions, you may have to go in and delete some folders and files. Just like here, you can see cctl Windows cctl Windows installer has been captured. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because it's not needed. Likewise, you can see .lnk file. That's not needed because the AppD sequence has its own shortcuts. So I'll delete that. Okay, so that's an example of applications you may actually, or files you may actually delete. If there was virtual services captured here, this is where they'd appear. And the OSD tab, basically, as I said, as it's an XML, it kind of parses the XML and puts it into kind of easily viewable tree view. Personally, I don't really like this. I like to just open it up in a text editor, the OSD files, and do my modifications there. But hey, if you want to use actual graphical user interface, you can use this OSD tab. So I'm going to go back to files here, because you can see there's VFS. VFS stands for Virtual File System. You can see there's certain files that got put right under 3.1. But this VFS means that the application still tried to install certain files to C drive. Now, some applications, they're just going to do this. That's it. I directed my installer to go to the queue as suggested, and I didn't put all of them there. You don't have to worry about that. You can see that it's put them under the VFS, which means that the AppD client is going to have to look under this VFS structure, folder structure, or directory, which means that it might take slightly longer to actually find the files. But it's very minimal because, you know, nowadays computers are quick enough at actually parsing through folders to find files. I wouldn't worry about it. So with that done now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save my application. So I'm just going to save it to my path. Remember, the path has to be the same as what we said earlier, right? Right there, but we'll get past that. So our path was Orca MSI editor 3.1 x86. And we'll save there. You can follow whatever naming convention you'd like. There we go, that's our virtual application saved. So I'm going to close out of that. I'll go to my output. Here you can see at the bottom is the report. That's the installation report that I had mentioned earlier. That automatically gets outputted. It will contain any files or folders that have been excluded. It's a good reference point if your application fails to function. There's also a manifest file created, which can be used to cache the applications to the user machine. It's also used during the SCCM integration. We won't concentrate on that because it's not going to be relevant to how we're using the full AppD infrastructure. The SPRJ file is our project file. So if I were to make any modifications and maybe add extra files, I'll have to open through the project file and make any project changes here. The SFT file is actually the compressed files and registry that have been encoded into the virtual file system and virtual registry. So this is the actual file that contains all of that information. So when the AppV client goes to stream an application, it's actually streaming from this SFT file. So it's probably the most important file. The OSD file, also a very important file. It contains information about this particular shortcut or this particular application or part of the application. So I can open this OSD file with a notepad, as I said earlier, and we can have a look. So you can see, again, it's an XML-based file. We can see our name and our version is Orca version 3.1. Our server is using our environment variable, which will be set on all the client machines. It's the RTSP protocol, port 554. And you can also see our path there is set to Orca MSI editor 3.1 x86. And it's now pointing to the SFT file. Okay, our size, a few other things in here that are relevant. If I locked down the application to only work on a certain OS, an OS tag would appear in here. We didn't choose that, so it doesn't appear. You can see our abstract is the comments we had inputted during our sequencing. You can see the management shortcut list, which is the shortcut and how it will appear. It uses our Orca icon, and it is going to appear under programs. Now you would have seen the cctl variable. We saw it appear a little earlier for cctl Windows. That's a variable for C Windows. So there's cctl program files, cctl Windows. That's just a variable for C program files and C Windows that the AppV client can understand. You can also see that our file extensions and file types are included here for this application. So it's going to say that this Orca editor is what we'll use, say, the MSI file type. So any MSI file that I open on the client machine with this sequenced or streamed to should open using this Orca editor. So I think that's pretty quick and concise rundown of the OSD file. So after we've done this, we want to go ahead and we want to upload this to our server. So I'm going to take my application and I'm going to browse to my content share. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy Orca to content. Now we should be ready to test our application. So let's move back to the AppV management server to import this in, and let's try and actually stream it to our client machine. So we are back on our streaming server, our management server. Let's browse to our actual content share. Now I set up the content share go to its default directory. You can set it wherever you want. You can actually also set it to a completely different network drive if you'd like, for example. I could show you how to set that up too. So let's look at our content share. What I'm going to do is, we don't really want this default application. And in fact, it's a good idea to remove it because it can cause some now. We've only got our Orca application. Let's go into our management server, which can be found under administrative tools. Okay, we're into our management console here. Let's connect to our server again. Okay, and here we go to applications. Let's delete our default application. We no longer want that. When removing an application, you remove the shortcuts firstly from applications, and then you remove the package from the default, or sorry, you remove the SFT file or the package from packages. So we're going to go to applications. We'll right click here. Okay, here we are now. So we see our information gets pre-populated here. We can assign it to a certain server group, so you may have multiple admin servers in different groups. Let's say next. The shortcut's going to be applied to the user start menu, which should be correct. You can see that your MSI, MSM, and PCP files are going to have file type association set. You can modify these here. So, for example, you can remove PCP. You can see also that it appears as though the icon does not line up. So you can go and you can change that. So let's actually figure the icon so they're set correctly. That's all good. A lot can be configured, you can see, through this actual wizard card. Access permissions. Let's set that up for an AD group. I've got app user set up. You may have specific AD groups for each application. And that should be correct. So let's hit finish. So there we have it. We could see our application Orca is now within the management console. So let's go test that on a client machine. So if I log off and log back in, I'll just show this to you. Since you've logged in, as we set during our app client setup, we set it to refresh from the server on login. So you can see we now have an Orca shortcut, as seen here. Now, before I launch this, I am expecting us to get an error or a UAC prompt, rather. So let's try and launch. There we go. Okay, so we've got an app v issue here, an app v error saying the requested operation requires elevation. And that's because this application does require elevation to run. So here we go. This is troubleshooting. What would you do in this case if it wasn't a virtualized application? Possibly use a shim. So for this kind of issue where an application requires elevation, you can actually modify your OSD for the shortcut that requires elevation and allow it to get around this issue. So let's do that. Okay, so to fix this issue, one possible fix is you could set an environment variable. Now, you don't have to set an environment variable on the machine. You can actually set it through the OSD and it will only apply to this shortcut or this virtual application. So you can put it into the virtual environment or end list, or in between this tag rather, and set it here. So let's save that. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to go into our client here again, and what we need to do is clear the application, clear the cache, and then restream down so we get the changes we've made. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to right click and hit unload. I'm going to right click and hit clear, and I'm going to right click and hit delete. So you can see if I go back, my shortcut should have disappeared, which it has. It's no longer there. Now I can manually stream the application back down by going to my publishing and hitting refresh server. And it should have streamed down now. So now if I launch again, we should no longer have that error if it worked, which it has. So you can see all our tables and everything appears correct. Now I hope this video has proven useful to you. We just went through the end-to-end of sequencing an application and then deploying it to our test machine.